Welcome to the Bookshelf Edit, where we break down the best books in security, risk, leadership, and management in under 20 minutes. No fluff, no filler, just the key insights that matter. Each episode, you'll get key takeaways from top security reads and decide whether you want to take a deeper dive into these topics yourself. Plus, we'll have guest appearances from industry leaders sharing their perspectives, as well as author interviews. Let's get into it. Most leadership books assume one of two things: that you're already in charge or that the system wants you to succeed. Scaling Pyramids is interesting because it assumes neither. This is a book about leadership inside organizations that don't always reward initiative, don't move quickly, and don't care how passionate you are about change, which frankly makes it far more realistic than most of what's out there. Now, my usual for transparency, I do know Chris. We have crossed paths professionally, and I've watched his work over time. What stands out to me about him is that he is an incredibly intelligent individual, but he's also someone who's continually learning. He's had a brilliant career, which would probably take a whole podcast series to discuss, so I'm not even going to start. But that matters for a book like this, because Scaling Pyramids isn't aspirational leadership writing, it's observational. And it's written by someone who understands bureaucracy not as a punchline, but as an environment that you have to learn to operate within if you want anything to change. This isn't a book about overthrowing hierarchies. It's about surviving them ethically, intelligently, and with your credibility intact. And that's a very different proposition from most leadership literature. If you listen to the previous episode on Mike Gibbs' book, that is more about leadership when the rules stop working, Chris's book is about leadership when the rules are working exactly as designed, and that's the problem. One of the strongest ideas running through Scaling Pyramids is that leadership in bureaucratic systems is fundamentally about literacy. So, knowing how decisions really get made, understanding who influences whom, recognizing where power sits versus where it's claimed. And it's not framed cynically, it's framed very realistically. Chris is very clear that you don't change systems by pretending that they're flatter, kinder, or faster than they are. You change them by learning their rhythms. For security and risk professionals, this is particularly relevant. We often operate as truth tellers in organizations that don't always want to hear uncomfortable truths. The book acknowledges something that many people feel but don't articulate. Being right is rarely enough. What matters is timing, audience, sequence, and trust built over time. It's not glamorous leadership, but it is effective leadership. I found a very useful idea in this book, which is leadership is less about direction and more about navigation. Chris uses the pyramid as both a structure and a constraint. You're not flattening it, you're not smashing it, you're figuring out how to move within it without getting crushed by it. And there's realism here. You can have the right idea, the right timing, even the right solution, but you'll still fail if you don't understand audience, influence, and sequence. And this lands because, let's be honest, security is full of people who are technically right, but organizationally ignored. And we see this all the time with risks identified too early, warnings delivered at the wrong level, brilliant insights that die in inboxes. So influence is something that you build sideways before you push upwards. And that's an under-discussed skill in our industry. Not everything needs escalation. And sometimes escalation is the fastest way to kill an idea. What I appreciated here is that he doesn't romanticize this. This isn't one of those influence without power as a motivational slogan. It's influence as strategic patience. You wait, you position, you refine, you build credibility quietly. And yes, that can be frustrating, but it's also how real change actually happens inside complex systems. Another area where this book really stands apart is how seriously it takes reputation. And not in a branding sense, but in a behavioral one. Chris repeatedly returns to the idea that leadership is shaped by how others experience you, how you respond under pressure, how you behave when you're not being watched. And this is where the book becomes quietly uncomfortable in a good way, because it asks readers to think not just about what they say, but what patterns they create. In security and governance roles, reputation is not abstract. It determines who brings you information early, who trusts your judgment, and whether your warnings are amplified or dismissed. What I appreciated here is that Chris doesn't frame reputation management as manipulation either. He frames it as self-awareness. You don't get to opt out of having a reputation. You only get to decide whether you understand it. And that's a very different leadership lens and a very useful one. And what he does really well is he connects self-awareness to leadership maturity. And there's a recurring emphasis on feedback, not the glossy kind, but the uncomfortable kind. The sort that reveals the gap between who you think you are and how you're actually experienced. A small observation here, and it's not a criticism, but I think that this approach requires emotional resilience, and not everyone is equally equipped for that level of reflection early in their career. But that doesn't make the point less valid, it just makes it honest. Leadership, as this book presents, isn't about confidence. So it's about tolerating insight, and that is harder. If I had to sum this book up in one phrase, it would be this: leadership is an endurance activity. This is not a book for people who are chasing visibility. It's for the people who stay. Chris spends time on stagnation, rotation, and slow progression, that long middle of a career where people either disengage or double down. And there's something quietly subversive about that, because modern leadership culture loves acceleration, fast impact, fast promotion, fast exits. But most organizations, especially in government, security, and large corporates, just don't move that way. They move through incremental trust and accumulated credibility, repeated exposure. And the book normalizes that reality without celebrating it either, because it's not saying this is how it should be. It just says this is how it is, and here's how you survive it with your integrity intact, which is an important distinction. There's also a thread here about risk aversion, especially at senior levels, and how fear of blame leads to paralysis. If you've ever watched decision-making grind to a halt because no one wants their name attached, this will feel uncomfortably familiar. But again, the solution isn't heroics. It's judgment, timing, credibility, and also knowing when not to push. That's not glamorous leadership, but it is effective leadership. So Chris treats leadership less as a series of bold moves and more as an endurance discipline. And it's a very important reframing, especially in security, where progress is often invisible. Success is measured by what doesn't happen, and impact accumulates slowly. It's not exciting. As I said, it's not heroic. It simply acknowledges that staying engaged, ethical, and effective over time is itself a form of leadership, and one that is very often undervalued. So, this is not a book about becoming a visionary leader. It's a book about becoming a credible one. If you're early in your career and you're looking for inspiration, this may feel sobering. If you're mid-career and quietly trying to figure out how to be effective without burning out or selling out, it will probably feel reassuring. Scaling pyramids doesn't promise transformation. It offers orientation. And in complex organizations, that might be the more honest gift. So who's it for? Not people looking for a shortcut. It's not for people who want leadership to feel inspirational every day. It is for mid-career professionals who feel stuck but not disengaged, security and risk practitioners operating without formal authority, and anyone trying to do the right thing inside imperfect systems. I would say this is a book about how leadership actually feels, not how it's marketed. And that's its strength. You're not going to finish it with a 10-point action plan, but you will finish it better calibrated to yourself, to your organization, and to the reality of influence. And honestly, that might be more useful. This episode is brought to you by Ceravoid, a Cape Town-based commercial intelligence and risk management firm working across Africa, supporting organizations to make informed decisions in complex operating environments. With a focus on human intelligence, they deliver due diligence investigations, geopolitical assessments, and market entry analysis. Linked down below. So, as I said earlier, I do know Chris. We've crossed paths professionally. And one of the things I really respect about him is that he is someone who is continually learning and educating himself. He pays attention to how organizations actually behave, not just how they describe themselves. Chris, thank you for joining me.
Thanks so much, Farah. Fantastic to be here with you, and I look forward to this conversation.
So, jumping right into it, one of the things that struck me right away is that this book isn't written from the usual vantage point. You describe yourself as a mid level bureaucrat, which is something that's usually said dismissively rather than deliberately. What made you want to write a book that centers leadership exactly there rather than at the top of the pyramid, which is where most leadership books tend to live?
The main reason is because, quite frankly, it's that middle of the pyramid that is both a crucible for leadership and developing the leadership skills so that you can scale up and get to those higher levels, but also understanding that it's that mid level that is so critically important to actually getting the goals and objectives of the organization done. Because while the top level can set those goals and objectives, it's really that mid level that then has to take that, interpret that, and move them forward with everybody else.
And it already kind of shifts the expectation for the book because leadership in those spaces very rarely comes with any sort of clarity, doesn't it? You're very open about the fact that leadership inside large organizations very often means acting with incomplete information and very limited authority. In your experience, what do people tend to underestimate about how difficult that really is?
Well, I think let's start with the authority piece. When you're trying to accomplish something, to make change in your organization, or even to really move forward the objectives of the organization, a lot of times at the mid level, you don't have your own intrinsic authority to do that. So, what you've got to rely on instead is the reputation you have built. You've got to rely on the um, network of others that you've built who can help you get things done. And it's a lot more collaborative, and it's a lot more focused on your own personal integrity, your own personal values, and the trust that you've built with others to get them to follow you along, to make sure that you can get done what you're trying to get done.
And so that shows up really clearly where you also do talk in the book a lot about influence. And a big part of scaling pyramids is the distinction between authority and influence. When you've seen change actually happen inside bureaucratic systems, what's usually going on at the human level that isn't happening where ideas stall?
So in the book, there's actually a section that talks about kind of the five key components to making an idea come to life. It's in the chapter on communicating vision, and the subtitle is "The problem is with vision is getting others to see." Part of it that comes down to, um, what is the problem that you're trying to address, and can you adequately communicate that problem? What is the solution that you're proposing, and does that solution actually make things better, or does it not? Then there's the question of the timing of everything. Is the problem you're trying to solve, does it need to be solved right now, or is it just kind of a major annoyance, a major or a minor frustration that needs to develop a bit more so that more people will see how big of a problem it is, before you can move forward with your proposed solution. The fourth part then, of course, becomes who are you trying to get your solution, your problem statement, and your solution in front of? Who are the decision makers that you need to influence? And there's that word influence again, because it's not just about influencing those around you, but it's about influencing those around you, below you, and above you so that they'll actually take your ideas and move them forward. But then the question becomes, so how do you influence them? How do you get them to pay attention to you? And then that becomes, do you have the appropriate relationships and network in order to get your ideas and solutions in front of those decision makers? And there's a couple of different ways in the book that I talk about to do that.
I'm really glad you touched on this little bit because actually I mentioned that full chain in my review because I really found it a really powerful educational tool. And in reference to that, that's really where reputation starts doing a lot of the heavy lifting for people. You also spend a lot of time on how leadership is shaped by how people experience you over time and not just by what you say in formal settings. For leaders who don't have positional power to fall back on, how should they be thinking about reputation day to day?
One of the things they need to understand is that reputation follows you everywhere. We are in a hyper connected world at this point. And the ability for people to learn information about you, about your background, to read stuff that you've posted online, to find, people they know. I talk about in the book 6 degrees of separation. How many people do they know who know you that they can go to and say, hey, can you tell me about so and so? And the question then becomes integrity. Are what you say and what you do congruent with each other? How you treat people becomes incredibly important because you want to make sure that you're treating people in a collaborative way that's actually going to empower and bring people together so that they will want to work with you, not just on this project, but in the future. That when somebody asks them, hey, can you tell me about so and so? The best possible answer is, that person is great. I would work with them any day of the week. And their ability to shape visions or to get things done or to focus on XYZ is above everybody else.
And that kind of credibility really only it reveals itself and builds over time.
Yeah.
I found there's a quiet rejection of fast leadership narratives. So, rapid impact, rapid promotion, rapid exits. Why do you think endurance matters more than brilliance, for example, in the kinds of systems that you're writing about?
The main reason is, and I'll come back to kind of how I started this conversation, the vast majority of people and the vast majority of work are stuck in, as one person I was talking to who phrased it recently, the muddled middle. And you will have those people that manage to advance very rapidly. Some of them because they're very, very good. Others because they are what is referred to as corporate psychopaths. Those that are willing to step on everybody else to get ahead and advance themselves as quickly as possible with no real care for those around them. But if you want to have long lasting impact, you need to learn these lessons over time in this muddled middle and recognize that you may never actually get to the top. There are so many different factors that interact with promotions and advancement and things like that that are out of your control. But if you focus on what you can control, you can actually affect lasting change in your organization, lasting improvements in your programs from wherever you happen to sit in that organization.
So, speaking of lasting, this kind of brings me to the long view. Looking back over your own career, is there a version of yourself earlier on who needed this perspective sooner, even if they may not have welcomed it at the time?
Absolutely. I know I struggled with my own frustrations over delayed promotions or, other people getting promoted ahead of me. I know that, um, as I constantly rotated assignments, and that's one of the things I talk about in the book is how frequently I rotated tours or assignments in my profession. Um, it really became, necessary to develop my own followership style better so that I could make sure that I was having an impact that I wanted and needed, but working within the confines and the constraints of whatever the new culture in the office was that I had just entered. And I know that as I went from some assignments to others, some where I had been more empowered to the next one where I was less empowered by the people above me, um, it could be really, really frustrating. And understanding and now having the ability to look at the full scope of my career and look at it and say, you know, okay, even with those sections, I was able to have influence, make change, lead others. And at the end of the day, I'm pretty happy with where I ended. I really wish I'd been able to tell myself earlier in my career journey that hold on, it'll all be okay.
Hold on, it'll all be okay. That's a good note to end on today. Thank you, Chris. For our audience, Scaling Pyramids is available now. You'll find the links below. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe, like, comment, share, all the usual. And I'll see you next time on the Bookshelf Edit.